The late afternoon sun, honeyed and heavy, slanted through the mullioned windows of Penwood Hall, gilding the dust motes that danced above the faded Axminster carpet. In the cavernous, oak-panelled library, Miss Elspeth Hartwell stood perfectly still, a slim, dark-clad figure against the towering shelves of leather-bound books. Her heart, however, was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. She was not alone. Across the room, silhouetted by the fire that crackled in the great stone hearth, was Julian Devereux, the Viscount Blackwood. He was not reading. He was watching her. The heat of his gaze was a tangible thing, warmer than the fire at his back, and it traced a path from the sensible knot of her chestnut hair, down the severe lines of her grey wool gown, to the tips of her serviceable black shoes. She felt stripped bare, though not a button was undone. "You find the volume you sought, Miss Hartwell?" His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder on a sultry day. It was the voice of a man accustomed to command, to being obeyed without question. Elspeth clutched the copy of Fordyce's sermons to her chest like a shield. It was her excuse for being here, for invading his sanctum. As the impoverished cousin of Lady Penwood, her role was that of a glorified companion, a quiet shadow in a house of faded grandeur. She had no business engaging the attention of its master, a man newly returned from London with a reputation as dark and thrilling as his name. "I have, my lord." "Thank you." Her own voice sounded impossibly small, a mouse's squeak in the vast room. She dipped a curtsy, eyes fixed on the worn pattern of the carpet, and turned to flee. "Stay." The single word halted her as effectively as a hand on her arm. She turned back, forcing herself to meet his eyes. They were a remarkable color, a stormy grey-green, and in their depths she saw not the polite indifference of the ton, but a fierce, unabashed curiosity. And something else, a smouldering hunger that made her breath catch. "You spend a great deal of time in here," he observed, pushing away from the mantelpiece and taking a slow, predatory step towards her. "Do my aunt's gossips bore you so terribly?" "I find solace in books, my lord," she said, her pride pricking. "They are dependable companions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it did not reach his eyes. "Unlike people. Unlike some people." His smile deepened, appreciative. He was close now, close enough for her to catch the scent of him, sandalwood, fine brandy, and the crisp, cold air of the winter ride he must have taken. It was an intoxicating, utterly masculine blend that spoke of a world far beyond her own narrow experience. "And what do you seek solace from, I wonder?" he murmured, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "The drudgery of your position? The pitying glances? The knowledge that your beauty is wasted behind a spinster's cap and a companion's gown?" Elspeth flushed, a hot tide of shame and anger. "My lord, you presume." "I do," he agreed, cutting her off. His hand came up, and with a featherlight touch, he traced the line of her jaw. A jolt, pure and electric, shot through her. "I presume to see what is plainly before me. A rose blooming in a forgotten corner. And it makes me wonder why it has been left to wither." His touch was fire and ice. It promised ruin and rapture in equal measure. She knew she should step back, utter a reproof, remember every stricture of her station and his. But her feet were rooted to the spot, her will dissolving under the intensity of his regard. He wanted her. The knowledge was terrifying, exhilarating, and as undeniable as the dawn. "There is a price for everything, Miss Hartwell," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Especially for daring to want what society says you cannot have." And with that, he withdrew his hand, leaving her skin tingling and her soul in tumult. He gave a slight, mocking bow and strode from the library, leaving her alone with the scent of sandalwood, the crackle of the fire, and the devastating echo of his words. The following weeks were an exquisite torture. Lord Blackwood was a capricious presence. Some days he ignored her utterly, engrossed in estate matters or hosting raucous hunting parties with his fashionable friends. On others, he would seek her out with a relentless, focused attention that set the entire household whispering that he found her sketching by the frozen lake, her fingers numb with cold. Without a word, he took her sketchbook, examined her competent but unremarkable drawing of a barren oak, and said, "You see only the bleakness. You miss the strength in its limbs, the promise of life waiting beneath the bark." His words felt like a critique of her very soul. He joined her on her solitary walks, his long strides easily matching her hurried ones. He spoke not of trivialities, but of philosophy, of his travels in Italy, of the stifling hypocrisy of London society. He listened, truly listened, when she ventured an opinion on Rousseau or made a shy observation about the nesting habits of robins. He made her feel seen, not as poor relation Elspeth, but as a woman of mind and spirit. And always, there was that undercurrent of desire. A brush of his hand against hers as he returned a book. The heat of his gaze lingering on the column of her throat. The way he would lean close to point out a constellation on a clear, cold night, his breath a warm cloud against her cheek. Elspeth knew the danger. She saw the way her cousin, Lady Penwood, watched them with a hawk's eye, her mouth a thin, disapproving line. She heard the titters of the maids, the speculative glances of the footmen. Her reputation, that fragile, priceless commodity for a woman with neither fortune nor family, hung by a thread. To love him, to succumb to him, would cost her everything. She would be ruined, cast out, destined for the life of a fallen woman, a fate worse than death in the eyes of the world. Yet, her heart refused to heed the warnings. It soared when he entered a room. It ached when he was absent. It whispered treacherous things in the dark of night, that a moment of true feeling was worth a lifetime of grey conformity, that his daring might be her salvation, not her doom. The crisis came on the night of the winter ball. Penwood Hall was filled with light, music, and the glittering local gentry. Elspeth, in a borrowed gown of silver-grey silk that had been her mother's, felt like an impostor. She hovered near the potted ferns, a wallflower amidst the blooms. Then he was there. Lord Blackwood, resplendent in black velvet and lace, cut through the crowd with single-minded purpose. He did not ask for a dance, he commanded it, leading her to the floor for a waltz, a dance still considered scandalously intimate by the county matrons. As his arm encircled her waist and his hand clasped hers, a collective gasp seemed to ripple through the room. "You are breathtaking," he said, his voice for her ears alone as they began to move. "A moonbeam among mere candles." "You should not, my lord," she whispered, her eyes on the intricate pattern of his waistcoat. "The talk. Let them talk." His grip tightened imperceptibly. "I am weary of their empty chatter. I want truth, Elspeth. I want fire. I see it in you, banked and hidden, but burning all the same." Her name on his lips was a caress. The music swelled, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The scent of him, the strength of his lead, the dizzying sensation of being whirled through a sea of staring eyes, protected and claimed by his presence. Later, he found her on the deserted terrace, shivering in the crystalline cold. The moonlight etched his handsome features in silver and shadow. "I can offer you no pretty promises," he said bluntly, his usual mockery gone, replaced by a raw sincerity that was more disarming. "My name is entangled, my future not entirely my own. There is an understanding with a lady in London, a matter of debts and duty." Elspeth's heart, so full a moment before, turned to stone and sank. So that was the consequence. He was not free. "But what I feel for you," he continued, stepping closer, "is a force beyond duty. It is a madness, a necessity. Come away with me. Tonight. To the hunting lodge. Let me show you a world beyond these stifling walls. Let me love you, not as a lord loves a poor relation, but as a man loves a woman." It was a proposition, pure and simple. The ultimate gamble. Her everything for a chance at his heart. The cold air bit her skin, but the heat of his offer was an inferno. She looked up at him, at the desperate hope in his stormy eyes, and saw her own reflection, a woman poised on the precipice. "To cost me everything," she breathed, the words a white mist between them. "To gain everything that matters," he countered, his voice urgent. "Courage, Elspeth. Just once, be daring." For a long, agonizing moment, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. It was an answer. It was surrender. It was the end of Miss Elspeth Hartwell, companion, and the terrifying, glorious beginning of something unknown. The hunting lodge was a small, stone-built haven deep in the Blackwood estate woods. A fire roared in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls hung with tapestries and hunting trophies. The world outside, with its rules and condemnations, ceased to exist. Here, Julian was not the viscount. He was a man captivated, his intensity softened into a tenderness that unraveled Elspeth completely. He kissed her not with the practiced skill of a rake, but with a hungry wonder, as if she were a miracle. He whispered her name like a prayer against her skin as he carefully, reverently, removed the silver-grey gown and the layers of constraint beneath. There was no shame, only a shocking, profound rightness. His hands learned the landscape of her body, mapping the slope of her shoulder, the curve of her waist, the secret, sensitive hollows that made her gasp. And she, emboldened by the dark and the firelight and the sheer enormity of her choice, learned him in return. The powerful breadth of his shoulders, the hard plane of his chest, the scar on his ribs that spoke of a duel or some wild adventure. Their coupling was not a gentle seduction, but a conflagration. A meeting of two desperate, lonely souls who had found their missing half. It was passion that shook her to her core, a union that felt less like sin and more like a sacrament performed before the altar of the roaring fire. After, as she lay in his arms, her head on his heart, listening to its steady, slowing beat, a peace deeper than any she had ever known settled over her. This, she thought dazedly, was worth any cost. For 3 days, they lived in a blissful cocoon. He read poetry to her. She cooked simple meals over the fire, laughing at her own clumsiness. They talked for hours, their souls spooling out before one another. He spoke of his lonely childhood, his fraught relationship with his father, the weight of the title he never wanted. She spoke of her lost parents, her precarious existence, her secret dreams of writing stories. In that quiet lodge, they were simply Julian and Elspeth, and it was enough. But reality, like the winter cold, was inexorable. On the 4th morning, a frantic pounding on the lodge door shattered their idyll. It was Harris, Julian's grim-faced valet. "My lord," he gasped, his breath pluming in the frosty air. "You must come at once. It's Lady Penwood. She knows. And a carriage from London has arrived." Lady Cynthia Devereux and her mother, all the colour drained from Julian's face. The understanding. The duty. It had found them. Elspeth wrapped her arms around herself, the warmth of the lodge leaching away in an instant. The cost was now due. The scene in the drawing-room of Penwood Hall was one of frozen fury. Lady Penwood sat rigidly on the chaise longue, her face pale with outrage. Opposite her, adorned in the height of London fashion and an expression of icy contempt, sat the Honourable Cynthia Devereux and her formidable mother. Cynthia was a porcelain beauty, all golden curls and rosebud lips, but her blue eyes were chips of ice as they swept over Elspeth, who stood trembling just inside the door, still in her borrowed, now rumpled gown. Julian stood in the centre of the room, a defiant figure, but Elspeth saw the tightness in his jaw, the shadow of defeat in his eyes. "You see, Cynthia," Lady Penwood said, her voice dripping with venom, "the depth of the humiliation you have been spared. Entangled with a penniless nobody, a scheming jade who no doubt plotted this from the moment she entered my house." "It was not like that," Elspeth cried, finding her voice at last. "What is between us is an illicit affair that ends now," Lady Devereux snapped. "Lord Blackwood, you have dishonoured my daughter, to whom you are all but betrothed. You have disgraced your name. The only path to salvaging any shred of honour is to marry Cynthia immediately and send this creature away. Tonight." Cynthia said nothing, only looked at Julian with a cool, expectant gaze. It was a gaze that spoke of settlements, of social position, of a life ordered and correct. Julian turned to Elspeth. The conflict in his eyes was a physical pain to behold. Duty, honour, the weight of centuries of Devereux's tradition, pressed upon him. To choose her meant scandal, ruin for them both, the potential loss of his estates to creditors without Cynthia's hefty dowry. His voice was hoarse, torn. "Elspeth." In that single, agonized utterance, she heard the death knell of her dreams. He was a viscount, bound by chains she could not break. Her love for him, which had felt so boundless in the lodge, was now the instrument of his destruction. To love him truly, she realized with a piercing clarity that stole her breath. meant she could not let him choose her. She drew herself up, summoning a dignity she did not feel. The room seemed to tilt, but her voice was steady. "There is no need for such dramatics," she said, addressing Lady Devereux but looking only at Julian. She willed him to see the love in her eyes, the sacrifice she made willingly. "There is nothing to salvage. I was merely a passing diversion for his lordship, a foolish fancy. I understood the terms perfectly. I require no sending away. I shall leave of my own accord." The lie was bitter on her tongue, but it had its intended effect. Julian flinched as if struck. Cynthia's lips curved in a satisfied smirk. Lady Penwood looked suspicious, but relieved. "You see," Elspeth continued, her heart shattering with every word. "It was of no consequence. Pray, proceed with your happy arrangements. They are of no concern to me." She did not wait for a response. She turned and walked from the room, her head held high, each step away from Julian feeling like a step into an abyss. She did not look back. She could not. The next weeks were a blur of grey misery. Through the icy generosity of a distant connection, Elspeth found a position as a governess in a remote, chilly parsonage in Northumberland. The moors were windswept and desolate, a mirror to her soul. She performed her duties mechanically, her laughter silenced, her spirit broken. The memory of Julian's touch was both a cherished treasure and a constant torment. She had saved him, but in doing so, she had destroyed herself. Spring came reluctantly to the north. One afternoon, as she took her young charges for a bracing walk, a lone horseman appeared on the crest of a hill, silhouetted against the leaden sky. Her breath caught. Even at that distance, she knew the set of those shoulders, the way he commanded the beast beneath him. He urged his horse down the slope, coming to a halt before her. He was thinner, his face etched with new lines of hardship, but his eyes burned with the same fierce light. Elspeth. Just her name. It was enough to make her knees weak. "My lord," she whispered, clutching the children's hands tightly. "You should not be here." "I have been everywhere but here," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Searching. For weeks. I finally pried your location from a terrified former footman." He took a step closer, ignoring the wide-eyed children. "You lied. In that drawing room. You lied to set me free." Tears she had thought long dried spilled down her cheeks. "It was the only way. Your duty. Your honor." "My honor died the moment you walked away," he said roughly. "I played their game for a month. I signed the contracts. And then, the night before the wedding, I looked at Cynthia and saw a lifetime of emptiness. I thought of you, your courage, your fire, your damned, beautiful, sacrificial lie, and I knew I could not do it." He closed the final distance between them, his hands coming up to cradle her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I renounced it. All of it. The marriage, the dowry, the favor of society. Let them call me a madman, a fool. My solacents are selling off everything that is not entailed. The townhouse, the horses, the paintings. The creditors will have to be satisfied with that. The Blackwood estate is a shell, but it is mine. And I want to fill it not with society's approval, but with you." Elspeth stared at him, disbelief warring with a hope so fragile it threatened to break her anew. You gave up everything. I gave up nothing of value," he said, his voice softening. "I gained only the clarity to see what truly matters. You told me once that books were dependable companions. Let me be your companion, Elspeth. Not out of duty, not out of passion alone, but out of a love that has been forged in loss and proven in choice. Marry me. Not as a viscount, but as Julian. A man who is hopelessly, desperately in love with the woman who dared to love him back, even when it cost her everything." He knelt there, on the damp, springing grass of the moor, the wind whipping his dark hair, his future in ruins, his heart in his hands, offering it all to her. Looking down at him, Elspeth saw not ruin, but freedom. Not a reckless gambler, but the bravest man she had ever known. He had faced the ultimate consequence and chosen her. Her own daring, born in a sunlit library and sealed in a firelit lodge, had led them here, to this wild, honest place where pretense had no hold. A smile, true and radiant, broke through her tears like the sun through the moorland mist. She released the children's hands and reached for him, her fingers tangling in his. Yes, she said, the word of vow carried on the wind. 1,000 times, yes. He rose and pulled her into his arms, and as his lips found hers, she knew that every consequence, every moment of fear and heartache, had been worth it. For in losing the world, they had found their own. And it was just beginning. The end. Do you love epic, emotional romance stories with guaranteed happy endings? Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. Moral of the story. True love requires the courage to choose what is real over what is expected, and sometimes the greatest strength is found not in claiming, but in sacrificing for the other's freedom. Thank you for watching. Bye until next time.